Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
The request reached the king without any warning, sealed inside a cream envelope and marked for his personal attention. By the time Charles finished reading the second page, his expression had hardened. Harry was not asking for an invitation, a temporary visit, or a supervised reunion. He was saying that his birth gave him continuing access to the sovereign's private Sandringham estate, and demanding that the palace restore privileges Charles believed had already been taken away. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure you subscribe to Royal Zone so you don't miss a single update. Charles held the document above the briefing table at Clarence House, and Queen Camilla watched his hand stop halfway through the final paragraph. Clarence House is the London residence where the king carries out his work, while Sandringham is not a public palace but a private estate passed down through the monarch's family. That difference made the demand explosive. Harry was not asking to attend a ceremony. He was challenging his father's control over a home tied to Christmas mornings, personal loss, and memories that could not be separated from family blood. The king lowered the pages and spoke with a calmness that frightened the room far more than shouting ever could. His son, he said, could not step away from royal duty and then claim unrestricted entry to the private rewards that came with it. Camilla heard the hurt beneath the anger. She also saw the danger clearly. The second page extended the request beyond Harry, asking for access for Meghan and their children too, without needing a fresh invitation each time. Harry felt the rejection before any answer had even been written. During a recorded call with a trusted representative in California, he said the restrictions had never felt like security measures alone. They felt like punishment. He believed the palace was using locked gates and written procedures to tell him that he no longer belonged inside the family circle, even when the land held memories of his entire childhood. Charles answered that fear with action. He placed his pen beside the envelope, ordered the estate office not to reactivate any historic family pass linked to Harry, and told his private secretary to prepare a final refusal. The private secretary is the senior aide who manages the sovereign's correspondence and schedule, which meant that order was more than just an angry reaction. It turned the entire dispute into official palace policy. William received the news before midday and immediately understood the threat. One concession could create a precedent, meaning a decision that could later be used to justify similar claims in the future. Yet before the refusal could be sealed, an aide uncovered an old promise Harry believed changed everything. The argument was no longer only about access. It was about whether a father could take back words he had once given to his son. For the public, Sandringham was a royal estate, wrapped in Christmas tradition and carefully managed appearances. For Charles and Harry, it carried something far more dangerous: memory. Every corner seemed to hold the shadow of a family that once gathered without lawyers, security negotiations, or written permission. Now that same place had become a wall between father and son, forcing both men to decide whether home was inherited through birth or lost through broken trust. Charles saw Sandringham as one of the last places where he could exist beyond ceremony. The sovereign, meaning the reigning king who stands at the head of the monarchy, still needed somewhere to simply be a father, a husband, and a grandfather, without every private moment becoming part of a public battle. After years of interviews, accusations, and family conversations reaching the outside world, the king feared that unrestricted access would destroy the little privacy that still remained. To him, the gates protected more than just land. They protected people who no longer felt safe speaking freely. Harry carried a completely different version of the estate inside him. He remembered cold childhood mornings, long walks beside William, strained family lunches, and the painful gathering that came just before his departure from royal duties. Losing entry did not feel like a security adjustment. It felt like someone was slowly removing him from his own history, one locked door at a time. Harry admitted that fear, during a private recorded conversation with Meghan in California. He told her he could not bear the idea of returning as an outsider, escorted across grounds where he had once moved without asking anyone's permission. The Duke, a royal title traditionally given to a senior male member of the family, said the humiliation was not about luxury. It was about needing approval from palace officials before visiting places connected to his mother, his grandmother, and the life he had lost. Meghan listened carefully, but she challenged him. She warned that the demand could look like an attempt to take back privilege rather than protect memory. Harry pushed back. He insisted the palace was trying to redefine him as a temporary visitor inside his own family, and he believed accepting that label would make the separation permanent. Charles's fury concealed an equally deep wound. Alone with Camilla after the morning briefing, he admitted that every attempt at reconciliation seemed to arrive with conditions, deadlines, or the threat of public consequences. The Queen Consort, meaning the wife of the reigning king, urged him to hear the pain hidden beneath Harry's formal language. Yet she also reminded him that estate access affected staff safety, private rooms, security planning, and relatives who feared their conversations might later be made public. William felt trapped between memory and duty. He remembered standing beside his brother during earlier crises, but he now feared Harry wanted the closeness and the privileges that came with it, without the silence and trust that closeness truly required. The prince paused outside his father's study, chose his words carefully, and then entered. William told Charles the decision had to be firm, lasting, and something that could be clearly explained. It could not look like punishment dressed up as policy. But before either man could settle the matter, an earlier humiliation returned to the center of the dispute. A night when Harry arrived at Sandringham, faced a locked gate, and discovered that his childhood home would not open for him. The conflict did not begin with the letter. It began months earlier on a cold evening at Sandringham, when Harry's vehicle slowed outside a private entrance he had used since childhood. The guard recognized him, but the gate did not open. Instead, a palace official approached the window and delivered a sentence Harry would remember word for word. Without the king's personal authorization, he could not proceed. What followed lasted less than 10 minutes, but changed the entire direction of the family dispute. Harry had returned to Britain for a memorial service connected to the late Queen, hoping to spend one private hour at Wood Farm before leaving the country. The property is a cottage on the Sandringham estate, closely connected to the final years of Prince Philip, making it a place of memory rather than ceremony. He had informed a former household contact, but no written approval from Charles had arrived. That missing permission became the difference between entry and rejection. Harry sat in the back of the security vehicle as the barrier stayed down. The official explained that his previous access status had been removed, and no exception could be made. He immediately called the king's office and asked for direct authorization. An aide answered instead, repeating that the sovereign was unavailable and that every visit now had to go through formal channels, meaning the approved process used to protect private royal residences. The refusal cut deeper than anyone at the gate understood. Harry did not see Wood Farm as an ordinary building. He remembered family conversations there, the quiet presence of his grandfather, and the painful years when the royal household still felt imperfect but reachable. Now even grief required permission. The Duke heard the official words as a brutal message. His memories remained, but his place inside them had been taken away. Charles learned about the incident later that evening and reacted with his own anger. He told Camilla that his son had arrived without confirmation and placed guards and estate staff under emotional pressure. The Queen Consort understood the pain behind the visit. Yet she agreed that security decisions could not fall apart simply because the person waiting outside carried royal blood. The king insisted that private sorrow did not erase responsibility. William became part of the wound days later. Harry believed his brother had personally supported the restriction, but the prince denied ordering the gate closed. He still refused to defend visits without prior notice, arguing that family history could not override safety and privacy. That answer convinced Harry that the future king had quietly accepted his exclusion, making the rejection feel like a united family decision rather than one single misunderstanding. Harry then went back to an old private letter written during earlier security talks. One sentence promised that Sandringham would always remain a place of family welcome. His advisors warned that the line was emotional and not legally binding, but he treated it as a promise from his father. Sadness hardened into purpose. He began preparing the formal claim that now sat on Charles's desk. When the king discovered that the locked gate had become the foundation of Harry's demand, he gave up the idea of a quiet written refusal. The next confrontation would happen directly, without lawyers, estate managers, or careful protective language. Charles wanted to hear his son defend the claim in his own voice. The video call opened with neither man smiling. Charles sat behind a closed study door with the disputed letter directly in front of him. Harry appeared from a private room in California, shoulders stiff and voice controlled. For several seconds, father and son exchanged only formal greetings. Then the king lifted the document, looked into the screen, and asked the question that stripped away every legal argument. "Are you asking to visit your family, or are you claiming a right over my home?" Charles drew the first line clearly. An invited family visit was one thing. Permanent estate access was something else entirely. Sandringham was a private royal residence, meaning property personally controlled by the sovereign rather than a public palace kept open through official duty. The king told Harry that he remained his son, but blood alone did not give him the right to enter restricted rooms, family quarters, or guarded grounds. Harry answered with quiet anger. He said every possible reunion had become a controlled palace operation, involving aides, schedules, security checks, and written permission. The Duke argued that no father should force his son to negotiate through officials before entering land where generations of their family had lived. He was not asking for ceremony. He was asking not to be treated like a stranger. Charles refused to give in. He reminded Harry that independence had been his own choice, and independence carried consequences. The monarch said his son could not reject royal obligations while holding on to permanent access to royal protection, private property, and family spaces. Freedom, he warned, could not work in only one direction. Harry's composure broke. He accused his father of using Sandringham as punishment for everything he had said publicly. The locked gate, he argued, had spoken more honestly than every palace statement. It told him he was welcome only when silent, obedient, and easy to manage. Charles leaned closer. He said trust had consequences too. Private conversations had entered interviews. Family pain had become material for books. Personal grievances had crossed oceans and reached millions of people. The king did not deny Harry's hurt, but he refused to pretend that going public had left the family's privacy untouched. Harry pushed back with equal force. He said telling his story did not give anyone the right to remove him from his own past. He asked whether memories of his mother, his grandparents, and his childhood now belonged only to working royals. Then Charles removed his glasses, placed them beside the letter, and delivered the sentence that froze the entire call. "You cannot claim what you walked away from." Harry stayed silent before answering that he had walked away from an institution, not from being his son. The anger between them grew colder after that. Charles offered individually approved visits, but permanent access would not return. Harry rejected the compromise because having to ask for permission each time left his father with the power to refuse him again whenever he chose. The king answered that private ownership could not be inherited through emotion alone. What had begun as a family wound was now turning into a battle over authority, security, precedent, and the future power of every monarch who came after Charles. By the following morning, the disputed letter was no longer resting on the king's desk. It had been sealed inside a red folder and carried into a restricted meeting attended by Charles, William, the estate's legal advisor, and the sovereign's private secretary. No cameras recorded the discussion. No public announcement was planned. Yet the decision forming inside that room would determine whether royal birth created permanent rights, or whether access ended wherever the reigning monarch chose to draw the line. Charles listened, as the estate advisor explained that Sandringham belonged personally to the sovereign rather than to the public institution of the crown. Crown property means residences and assets held for official use, while a private estate remains under the monarch's personal control. That distinction gave the king full authority over guest permissions, residential access, staff instructions, and security boundaries. It also made Harry's demand far more serious than a simple request for family courtesy. William understood the danger immediately. He warned that granting his brother a permanent entitlement could create a precedent, meaning one decision later used to justify similar claims by others. Future relatives might demand unrestricted access after leaving royal duty, separating from the family, or publicly challenging the monarch. The prince supported invitations when personal circumstances allowed, but he completely rejected the idea that any independent household could set its own conditions for entering the sovereign's home. Charles remained quiet, yet the language wounded him. His son's name now appeared beside phrases like access category, residential risk, and security control. The king rubbed the edge of the folder and admitted that he hated seeing Harry reduced to an estate management problem. William did not soften his position. He reminded his father that the monarchy had suffered every time guilt delayed necessary decisions, and that kindness without clear limits could actually deepen the very conflict it was meant to heal. Camilla found Charles alone after the meeting, holding an old photograph from a Sandringham Christmas gathering. The Queen Consort saw him pause over the younger Harry and heard him admit that the estate had once represented a family unity he could no longer get back. She told him that protecting the house did not require denying the love attached to it. Still, she warned that memory could not become permission without clear boundaries in place. The private secretary then delivered the detail that turned Charles's sadness back into anger. Harry's representatives had demanded a response by a fixed deadline. The senior aide, who manages the sovereign's official correspondence and schedule, said the wording left very little room for a quiet family discussion. To the king, it felt less like a request for reconciliation and more like an ultimatum. Charles approved the ruling. Harry would hold no automatic, inherited, or permanent right of private access. Every future visit would require the monarch's personal invitation, agreed security arrangements, and clearly defined limits. Yet the king added one human concession: requests involving memorials, serious illness, or urgent family matters would reach him directly. The document had not even left the palace when Harry learned the answer. The boundary was no longer temporary. It had become official. Harry received the answer early one California morning. He read the first paragraph beside the kitchen counter, then went back to the beginning, as though reading it again might somehow change its meaning. It did not. The king had rejected every claim of permanent access. Future entry to Sandringham would depend on a personal invitation, advance security approval, and boundaries decided entirely by Charles. The estate of Harry's childhood had become a place he could only enter as someone else's guest. Harry reacted with disbelief before anger set in. He had expected negotiation, limited access, or some kind of temporary arrangement, but the ruling recognized no standing entitlement at all. A standing entitlement means a continuing right that does not require fresh approval each time. The language was calm, but its meaning was brutal. His place inside the estate would now depend entirely on whether his father chose to open the door. Meghan watched him fold the pages and put them down without saying a word. She asked whether Charles had included any personal message. Harry answered that the most personal sentence was the one declaring that a blood relationship did not create property rights. He told her the palace no longer saw him as a son returning home. It saw him as a security risk, a public problem, and a household that needed to be managed. Meghan felt his anger rising and urged restraint. She warned that an immediate public statement would allow the palace to present every restriction as completely necessary. The Duchess, a title given to the wife of a duke, reminded him that silence could sometimes be far stronger than another public accusation. Harry resisted at first, then admitted that speaking too quickly might destroy any remaining chance of reaching his father directly. Charles received confirmation in Britain that the ruling had been delivered. Relief never came. The king asked whether Harry had acknowledged receiving it, revealing the hope that still sat beneath his firm decision. When the answer was no, he looked down at the same desk where the decision had been signed and understood that winning a legal argument could still feel like complete failure inside a family. William remained certain the boundary was necessary, but he did not celebrate it. During a private conversation with Catherine in a corridor, he admitted that protecting royal privacy did not make the outcome feel just or triumphant. The Princess of Wales, meaning the wife of the heir to the throne, told him that necessary decisions could still carry grief. He answered that the real danger was allowing the conflict to reach their children. The consequences moved quickly. Harry's former estate contact received instructions that no informal arrangement could be accepted. A planned visit connected to a future family anniversary was placed in serious doubt. Yet he refused to submit a new formal request, because doing so would look like giving in. Charles almost called him. An aide warned that emotional words could make the written position more complicated. So the king dismissed everyone and sat alone staring at the telephone. Then Harry broke the silence, not with a legal reply or a public attack, but with one simple request: a private conversation with no advisors, no documents, and no conditions attached. There were no private secretaries listening, no legal folders open, and no palace deadlines counting down. Charles took the call alone from a small sitting room, while Harry closed the door to his California study and asked Meghan to give him some time. The conversation that followed was quieter than their first confrontation. That quietness allowed something far more painful to come through. Harry was no longer trying to prove that he held a legal right. He was trying to find out whether his father still pictured him ever coming back. Harry spoke first. He said he understood the legal decision, even if he could not accept what it seemed to mean on a personal level. He asked Charles whether the refusal had truly been designed to protect Sandringham, or whether it was meant to show him that he no longer truly belonged inside the inner family. The king did not answer quickly. He admitted that privacy and trust had become impossible to separate after years of very public conflict. Charles told him that he was still his son, but unrestricted access could not survive when relatives feared their private words might later become public knowledge. Harry listened, then revealed during that private recorded conversation that the word access had become a kind of shield. What he really wanted to know was whether any place still existed where he could return without feeling watched, judged, or only temporarily tolerated. That question weakened Charles's anger. He admitted that palace procedure had sometimes replaced compassion, especially during the night at Wood Farm. Palace procedure means the formal system of approvals, security checks, and official communication used to protect royal residences. The king acknowledged that those rules had been applied without enough humanity. Leaving Harry outside the gate without speaking to him personally had turned a security decision into a message of rejection. Charles apologized. He did not take back the restrictions, but he accepted responsibility for the silence that had surrounded them. Harry received the apology without any sense of triumph. He admitted that forcing the matter through a formal claim had made reconciliation look like a contest over ownership. The Duke had wanted certainty, yet his demand had pushed both men deeper into legal language when neither of them truly wanted to be there. Charles then delivered the words neither of them had expected. "You will not have a permanent pass, but you do not need a pass to remain my son." Harry lowered his head before answering. He said those words should have been spoken long before the letter, the deadline, and the locked gate. The pain remained, but the battle changed. Father and son agreed that future visits would be discussed directly before aides became involved. Harry would receive no automatic right, while Charles would no longer allow genuine family requests to disappear inside administration. The turning point was not surrender, it was clarity. The estate remained protected, but fatherhood would no longer be expressed only through rules. Then fragments of the dispute reached the media, forcing the world to judge a private understanding it could not fully see. By sunrise, the family dispute had become a national spectacle. One newspaper placed Sandringham's closed gates across its entire front page beneath the words, "No royal right of return." Television presenters debated whether Charles had protected the monarchy or permanently rejected his own son. Yet the image that captured public feeling did not come from a studio. It appeared outside the estate itself, where visitors gathered near the entrance Harry had once been prevented from crossing. The headline spread because it turned a private wound into a public verdict. Sandringham remained a privately owned royal residence, meaning the king controlled access as a personal owner, rather than through public duty. That distinction mattered legally, but it disappeared completely beneath the emotion of a locked gate. To millions watching, the story looked simpler and far harsher. A father had closed his home to his son. A morning broadcaster described the crisis as a dispute over whether royal blood survives royal departure. The phrase traveled quickly because it captured the fear beneath Harry's demand. Had leaving official duty also ended his permanent place inside the family? Commentators argued over privilege, trust, inheritance, and betrayal. While the private conversation between father and son remained unknown, crowds gathered at Sandringham's public approach behind the marked boundary. Some visitors defended Charles, saying no family member should claim unrestricted entry after years of public conflict. Others left handwritten notes, urging reconciliation. Then, an elderly woman held up a card bearing a simple message: "A home needs boundaries, but a family needs a door." A recorded broadcast carried the image across the country, and it became the human heart of the entire debate. Harry watched the coverage with growing frustration. Reports described him as attempting to take royal property, reducing his emotional claim to nothing more than greed and entitlement. Meghan reminded him that correcting every exaggeration would expose the private promise he had just made to his father. She told him silence would hurt, but breaking it could destroy the small amount of trust they had just managed to rebuild. Charles felt no satisfaction either. He was troubled by claims that he had banished Harry forever, and ordered palace staff not to celebrate the ruling or say anything negative about his son. The king insisted that the decision concerned automatic access, not permanent exile. He had defended his ownership, but he refused to turn that into humiliation. William supported the silence, even though he knew harsher versions of the story would dominate the news. The prince believed one news cycle mattered far less than protecting the fragile new understanding between Charles and Harry. A brief palace statement confirmed that private royal residences remained under the sovereign's discretion, meaning the monarch held the final authority to approve entry. It mentioned no accusations, no deadlines, and no family grievances. Harry issued no public challenge. His silence revealed that something had genuinely changed. Even though the written result remained in Charles's favor, the final meaning of the dispute would now depend not on headlines or gates, but on what father and son chose to do after the anger had passed. The decision was never reversed. Harry did not receive permanent access to Sandringham. His former estate privileges were not restored, and Charles did not weaken the authority attached to his private home. Yet the outcome was not the complete rejection many had predicted. Behind the written refusal, father and son finally faced the truth that had been driving their conflict for years. Harry had mistaken access for belonging. While the king had allowed boundaries to express emotions, he had been unwilling to speak out loud. Charles kept the ruling clear. His son possessed no automatic right to enter the sovereign's private estate, and every future visit would require a direct invitation and agreed security arrangements. The sovereign is the reigning monarch with final authority over privately owned royal property. That power remained completely untouched. The king had defended Sandringham, but he now understood that rules without any personal explanation could feel like rejection rather than protection. Harry withdrew his formal claim instead of pushing the dispute further through lawyers, interviews, or public accusations. The Duke accepted that childhood memories did not create shared ownership over land controlled by his father. He had lost the argument over permanent access, but he had gained something the original demand could never force: a direct promise that genuine family requests would reach Charles personally. Charles changed his own approach as well. He instructed his office that future messages from Harry involving family visits, memorials, or urgent personal matters must be placed before him directly. No aide would again make an emotionally important decision without the king knowing about it. That order did not remove palace procedure, meaning the formal system used to manage security and royal schedules, but it stopped procedure from replacing fatherhood. Harry tested the new understanding several weeks later. Before an upcoming trip to Britain, he contacted Charles himself and asked for permission to visit a private memorial location at Sandringham. He cited no inherited entitlement and sent no representative. The king approved a limited visit and delivered the answer personally. Security restrictions remained, yet the exchange no longer felt like a legal negotiation. It felt like a father giving his son a clear and direct response. Harry entered through the gate that had once stayed closed. He did not cross because he had won permanent rights. He crossed because an invitation had been freely offered and respectfully accepted. That difference settled the conflict. William remained cautious, but he recognized that a healthier way forward had been created. The prince saw that boundaries could survive without humiliation, and that authority could remain firm without turning silence into punishment. Meghan also understood the result. She knew Harry had less freedom, but he finally had greater clarity. Charles had been furious because the demand had challenged his privacy, his trust, and his control. Harry had been wounded because the refusal made him fear that losing royal status also meant losing his father and his entire past. Neither man received everything he wanted. The final verdict was clear. Harry lost his claim to permanent estate access. Charles retained complete authority. Yet both men finally separated home from ownership and family from entitlement. Royal blood could create memory, history, and emotional connection, but it could not grant unlimited private privilege. Belonging could not be demanded through a locked gate. It had to be rebuilt through trust. The gate opened only by invitation. The king's authority remained completely intact, and the conflict ended with a boundary neither man could ever mistake again. Thanks for watching Royal Zone. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to Royal Zone so you never miss an update, and we will see you in the next one.